Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload, and I used to think endings arrive like thunder. Loud, decisive, impossible to miss. Ours came on tiptoes. One day Ava stopped humming while she watered the spider plant. The next, she started locking her phone as if it were a vault. Then she announced she had late meetings though her marketing firm had trimmed hours. Every tiny change felt harmless alone, like a loose thread on a sweater. Pull enough of them, and you're standing in a pile of yarn. We met in a community college class on public speaking. I fumbled a 2-minute introduction, and she laughed, not at me, but with me. That laugh could warm a room. We built a small life, an apartment with a sticky sliding door, weekend hikes, board games with neighbors. After my promotion at the city utilities office, we upgraded to a bungalow where the hallway floor creaked exactly twice between bedroom and kitchen. It felt like a promise. Steady, ordinary, ours. In 2020, when masks and quiet streets made everything feel unreal, I booked a procedure because we both said we were done with surprises. We'd had a loss years earlier, and the grief had left grooves on our plans. The doctor reminded me to think it through. I did. I went home with an ice pack, a signed letter for my medical file, and a sense that we were choosing the shape of our future together. Ava brought soup, patted my shoulder, and teased me for milking the sympathy. We joked about being a team, the kind that plans, not hopes. The first odd moment came the following spring. She bought new perfume, something with a citrus sting, and wore it to brainstorm nights. I noticed it most when I hugged her goodbye, and the scent stayed on my shirt longer than her arms stayed around me. I told myself not to be suspicious. A partner who frets at every unfamiliar note turns into a detective instead of a spouse, and detectives don't laugh at breakfast. Yet the little things piled up. She went from casual runner to someone who tracked every split and mile. She started using words I'd never heard from her. Macros, rucks, intervals. Her gym playlist thumped behind the bathroom door as she got ready at dawn, whisper singing lines under her breath. I asked about the new routine, and she said, "Healthy body, clear mind," which sounded like a slogan and not an answer. I tried to be better. I cooked dinners she liked, left sticky notes on the fridge telling her to have a great day, and didn't press when she said she was tired. When a relationship frays, you grasp for patience because anger feels like admitting the unraveling you fear. But patience without trust is just waiting for a shoe to drop. The shoe finally fell when I saw a message light up her screen as she reached for the kettle. A name, no last initial, no emoji, just Cole. The text said, "Same spot tonight?" She flipped the phone face down so fast the spoon clinked against the tile. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. I said nothing, because how do you accuse someone with one vague message? She smiled like nothing had happened and asked if I wanted cinnamon in my coffee. I did my own quiet checking. The gym posted photos from charity events. In one shot, a tall trainer had his arm around a group. Cole. Handsome in the way of people who never dodge cameras. Another weekend, Ava claimed she needed to help a coworker move. The coworker posted pictures of a wine tasting that day, clearly not hauling furniture. I said I hoped the move went smoothly, and she said it did. I rehearsed conversations with her in my head, and the words kept breaking apart. I didn't want to be shrill or petty. I also didn't want to be naive. I booked a session with a therapist, a quiet man who asked more questions than he answered. He said to write down what I knew, what I suspected, and what I wanted. Simple columns. The first held facts, messages, schedule shifts, the vasectomy paperwork. The second held shadows. The third had only one line. I wanted truth. When I finally asked her, she stared over my shoulder at nothing. "You've been distant," she said, as if my question had caused the distance, not the other way around. She admitted nothing but grew prickly, like a cat fluffed up at a stranger. That night she slept on the couch. In the morning, she asked me if I thought we should try a trial separation just for clarity. It sounded so administrative that I almost laughed. We rotated nights at the house for a month. Neighbors thought we were remodeling because they heard hammering. It was only me tightening loose hinges, repairing drawer slides, mending things I could actually fix. Then, a Friday in May, she asked to meet at the coffee shop where we'd had our first date. She showed up with a folder and a careful smile. Inside, divorce papers. "It's better for both of us," she said, gentle but firm, like a nurse giving a shot. She wanted a fair split. The house sold, both of us free to start again. She didn't mention Cole. I nodded because the truth had already decided the direction. I contacted a lawyer, a calm woman named Priya, whose voice made every storm feel navigable. Priya asked me for assets lists, messages, medical details. When I told her about the vasectomy, she looked up, one eyebrow lifting half an inch. She told me to hold on to every document. The months that followed were paperwork and polite coldness. My job felt like a life raft. I filed forms on time, kept my replies to her measured, and tried not to picture her life when she wasn't with me. On nights when the house felt too vacant, I sat in the backyard and listened to wind scrape the fence. I learned to cook pasta without overboiling the water and to press shirts without crisping the buttons. Friends invited me to trivia nights, and I said yes, because saying yes kept me from staying in my head. 3 weeks before the hearing, I heard a rumor from a neighbor who didn't know it was a rumor. "Saw Ava at the farmer's market," he said. "She's glowing." He lowered his voice. "You two reconciling?" My hands went cold around the paper bag of apples. I asked why he thought that, and he said, "Well, she looks expecting." The air wobbled. The vasectomy letter in my safe felt suddenly heavier than a piece of paper. I didn't contact her. If I was wrong, I'd be the fool with cruel words. If I was right, the hearing would do the speaking for me. Priya said, "Don't get dragged into drama before the judge sees the picture. Keep calm. Bring your records." I scanned the medical certificate, the lab confirmation, the invoice. Dates, signatures, contact information, evidence, not emotion. The morning of court smelled like dust and disinfectant. I wore the blue suit reserved for weddings and interviews, and told myself that listening well would be more useful than talking fast. The courtroom buzzed with the soft hum of people unspooling their lives into legal language. Ava arrived 10 minutes late, which used to make me anxious when we went to movies because I cared about previews. This time she entered like a queen returning from a parade, chin up, smile bright, hand resting on a gentle curve under a trim blazer. Her lawyer, a young man who dressed like a television version of a lawyer, pulled out her chair. She flicked a glance toward me and held it long enough for me to see certainty there, almost pity. I thought of the coffee shop where she'd slid papers across the table. This smile was the same. Decided, choreographed. The judge called our case. We stated names. Priya outlined the timeline of our marriage, the separation, and the property questions. Ava's counsel stood and cleared his throat with drama. He said, "Your Honor, before we begin, there's a significant development pertaining to my client's condition." He gestured toward my wife like he was unveiling a museum piece. Ava's hand landed again on her stomach. Gasps ripple in movies. In court, people mostly blink. The judge frowned and asked for clarification. Ava's lawyer said, "My client is expecting a child." He paused. "She states the child is her husband's. She also asserts that his recent conduct amounts to abandonment of his new family." He said the last phrase as if I had already packed a suitcase and left a bassinet by the door. The words felt surreal, like a radio slightly off frequency. For an instant I saw our kitchen table and the vase with tulips from Mother's Day last year. I remembered her humming and the creak between rooms. Then the fog cleared. Priya squeezed my arm once, a small grounding signal, and rose. "Your Honor," she said, "we object to this characterization and the insinuation of paternity. My client will respond, but first I request that any statements be made under oath." The judge looked at me. "Do you wish to reply now?" Priya nodded. I stood. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, steady as a metronome. I kept my voice even. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm not abandoning anyone. And with respect to paternity, well, this is simple." I pulled a folder from my bag and set a certified copy on the ledge. I underwent a vasectomy in the year 2020. The words felt cool and solid in my mouth. I have medical documentation, physician contact information, and confirmation of sterility after the procedure. Ava's smile thinned as though the air had shifted. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. The judge lifted the document without hurry, scanned page 1, then page 2, and passed it to the clerk. The room seemed to quiet around the paper's soft rasp. Across the aisle, my wife pressed her lips together, the confident curve gone. The certainty in her eyes receded like tide. Her attorney asked for a recess, fast, the polish gone from his tone. The judge granted a brief break. People stood at once, and the spell of stillness broke. Priya leaned close and whispered, "Breathe." We expected a move. We answered. I nodded. My hands shook anyway. We stepped into the corridor's lemon-cleaned chill. A bench down the hall creaked when I sat. Priya reviewed a checklist on her tablet, calm as a pilot before takeoff. Ava and her lawyer ducked into a consultation room, the door closing with a hush like a library stack. I stared at the scuffed floor and felt both light and exhausted, as if I had finished a long run I hadn't known I'd started. I wasn't done. The truth about my surgery was only the first card. Evidence must be more than a surprise. It has to be a pattern. The second card rested in my pocket, folded small, the ink barely dry. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up sorting through bank statements, social posts, gym flyers, and messages that no longer tried to hide. I remembered the gym's charity page with smiling photos, the trainer with easy charm, and the date stamps that lined up with her brainstorm nights. I remembered the bank line item labeled Horizon Studio, a photography business across town that did progress shoots for fitness clients, where appointments were booked in the name of C. Mercer. I kept my eyes on the courtroom door. When recess ended, they would return, and so would I, steady, plain, ready. The first truth had erased the story they tried to write for me. The next truth, the one I'd kept quiet, even from Priya until this morning, would redraw the entire picture. The corridor clock ticked like a leaky faucet. When the bailiff called us back, I felt oddly calm, as if my bones remembered the rhythm of steady work. Sort facts, file forms, speak plainly. Ava returned with her lawyer. No hand on her stomach now, no glow. She wouldn't meet my eyes. He shuffled papers like a magician who had lost the deck. We took our places. The judge folded her hands and asked if counsel wished to continue. Ava's attorney tried a new tactic, soft voice, careful words. He said, "There may have been a misunderstanding. Emotions run high." He spoke about the stress of separation and how memories can blur. He proposed pausing property discussions until paternity questions were resolved. Priya stood. "Your Honor, my client produced proof of sterility. We're prepared to proceed on assets today. However," she added, "given the insinuations that paint my client in a cruel light, we have additional materials related to credibility." The judge's gaze flicked toward us, curious but neutral. "Go ahead." I took a breath. "I'd prefer to say this once and precisely," I said, and the judge nodded. I reached into my bag and brought out 2 envelopes. The first held printouts of bank transactions. Nothing flashy, just lines of numbers that tell their own tale. The second contained photos, smiling faces, dates stamped in the corner, backgrounds I recognized. "Months ago," I said, "I noticed charges that didn't fit our patterns. Studios, ride shares to neighborhoods we never visited, subscriptions tied to email handles I'd never seen. I asked gentle questions. I got vagueness. I worried I was inventing monsters in the closet." I tapped the papers. "So I did what any clerk does when ledgers don't match. I traced." Priya handed the judge a summary sheet. On it, the expenses lined up with Thursdays, a day Ava always claimed went to late strategy sessions. Receipts from a photography studio called Horizon, dinner at a bistro near the gym, rides that began at our house and ended a few blocks from Cole's apartment. Ava stared at the table. Her lawyer objected to character attacks, but the judge overruled. "This goes to credibility and potential dissipation of marital funds," she said. "I'm not here to shame anyone," I continued, and I meant it. "But I won't be accused of abandoning a child that can't be mine and a family I didn't create. If we're dividing a life, we should see all the pieces." Priya slid forward the photos from Horizon. Transformation sessions, progress shots over 3 months, a pregnant client beaming next to a trainer. Cole's hand hovered near Ava's back in 2 frames and rested there in a third. The photographer's watermark and timestamps were clear, 6, 8, 10 weeks apart. The judge studied them the way a gardener studies a plant tag, verifying sun and water needs. Ava's lawyer leaned over to whisper. She kept staring ahead. Finally, she said very quietly, "I was going to explain after today." The judge lifted an eyebrow. Silence unraveled between us. It would have been easy to savor the moment, to add a sting. I stayed even. Your Honor, I'm not seeking punitive damages or public humiliation. I'm asking for an equitable split, acknowledgement that certain expenses benefited only one party, and a clean end. I also ask for a formal finding that I am not the father, to prevent future entanglements. He pushed back, saying emotions warp judgment. He requested a continuance, a longer recess, a mediation day. Priya said we were ready to proceed now. The judge considered, then declined the delays. We'll resolve property today, she said, and set a separate status conference for paternity to ensure the record is tidy. We went line by line through accounts, car title, furniture, even the silly waffle iron awarded in a bridal raffle. I watched the numbers march into boxes. Whenever dissipation arose, Priya calmly pointed to our sheet. Charges at restaurants where I'd never stepped, studio fees, hotel receipts labeled with Cole's initials. The judge marked a column to credit me a portion when tallying the final balance. Not vengeance. Math. When the heavy parts ended, the judge asked if either side wanted to make a final statement. Ava's lawyer passed. Priya looked at me. I hadn't planned a speech, only a sentence I'd practiced on late walks. I wish her well, I said, and my voice didn't crack. But I won't carry stories that don't belong to me. The judge nodded. Decree will issue this week, she said. Counsel, thank you. We stood. The room rustled as people rotated in and out with their own heartbreaks. Ava approached, hesitant, like a kid rehearsing an apology. I didn't mean to humiliate you, she said. I thought if I told it a certain way, it would hurt less. Stories aren't painkillers, I said. They're mirrors. She swallowed. It isn't about money. I know, I said. That's why we're ending it. For a second, she looked like the girl from public speaking class, unsure, hopeful, hair falling into her eyes. Then the moment closed and she turned away. Her attorney guided her toward the door. Cole waited in the hall, pretending to study a bulletin board. He met my gaze. I met his. Nothing needed saying. Life would teach its lessons without my help. Priya and I stepped into afternoon sun. You handled that with dignity, she said. Most people want fireworks. I'm tired of fireworks, I said. I like porch lights. She smiled, handed me a copy of the filings, and reminded me about the next date to finalize the record. We shook hands. I walked to the parking lot lighter than I'd felt in months, not joyous, but unburdened. A quiet kind of relief. On the drive home, I took the long route by the river. Kids kicked a ball near the path. A dog tried to befriend a flock of geese and failed adorably. I parked by an overlook and let the breeze wash the antiseptic smell of court from my clothes. I thought of the second trump card that had sealed the day, the simple ledger of choices. Revenge, it turned out, didn't need flame. It just needed sunlight. Back at the house, I opened windows, changed the sheets, brewed tea. The creaking boards sounded like an old friend clearing his throat before telling a joke. I pulled out the spider plant, trimmed the dead ends, and brought it to the porch. Leaves perked as if surprised to be seen. Friends wanted to celebrate that evening. I told them another night. I made a bowl of pasta, too much garlic, just how I liked it. After dinner, I drafted an email to HR to update beneficiaries and addresses. Then I wrote to Priya thanking her for steady work. I even typed a short note to Ava, unsent, wishing health for the baby, clarity for her decisions, and peace. I deleted it. Some thoughts don't need an envelope. Before bed, I opened the safe and returned the folder of records. Behind it lay a postcard from the year we honeymooned at a lake cabin, a drawing of pines and a canoe. I kept it. History isn't a mistake just because the ending hurts. When sleep finally came, it wasn't the hard crash of exhaustion, but the slow settling a house does at night. Beams relaxing, air evening out. Tomorrow would be chores and a run by the water. Maybe a call to my sister about the spare room for her visit. Ordinary plans earned the hard way. Revenge had been promised as an explosion. Mine was a ledger balanced, a false story corrected. A door closed with a latch instead of a slam. Life, cleaned of noise. And in that quiet, I heard the future knocking, not with fists but with knuckles, polite, patient, ready to be let in. Weeks passed after the hearing, yet silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Papers arrived by mail, stamped and official, confirming what the judge had said. Divorce finalized, no appeals, no questions left. Just ink on paper and peace where noise used to live. I read the decree once, then tucked it into the folder that held everything from that chapter of my life, sealed it, and placed it in the back of my closet. Closure doesn't always make a sound. Sometimes it's the absence of one. The first weekend alone, I drove to the lake where Ava and I had honeymooned years earlier. The cabin we'd rented was still there, only now freshly painted and owned by someone else. I stood at the dock as morning fog clung to the water. It smelled like pine and rain, the same as before, but the weight in my chest was different, lighter, not because the past vanished, but because I no longer had to carry it in secret. I skipped a flat stone across the water. It leapt 4 times before sinking. That seemed about right. When I returned to the city, I noticed how time moves on without asking permission. The trees lining our street had started to shed. I replaced the faded curtains, repainted the living room, and sold the old dining table that always reminded me of long arguments disguised as dinners. Every nail hammered in, every stroke of paint felt like claiming my space back. The house stopped echoing her absence and began humming with possibility. People said revenge stories end with flames, but mine was more like pruning, cutting what no longer grows to let light reach the rest. The truth had been my weapon, but forgiveness was my peace treaty, not for her but for myself. Carrying bitterness, I realized, was like keeping a room locked even after moving out. One evening, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found her notebook, the one she used for grocery lists and random quotes. On the last page, written in her looping handwriting, was a line from some song. Sometimes losing means learning where you end and where the world begins. For the first time, I didn't feel anger reading her words. Maybe she'd learned too, in her own way. I started running again. At first it was just around the block, breath ragged and lungs unused to effort. Eventually I joined a small local group that met on Sundays. There was laughter, people sharing playlists, talk about shoes and pacing. No one knew my story, and that anonymity felt like grace. Months later, I bumped into Priya at a grocery store. She smiled and asked how life was treating me. I told her I'd taken up running, learned to cook more than pasta, even tried painting badly, but enthusiastically. She laughed. "You sound free," she said, and I realized I was. I never heard much about Ava after that. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd moved to another city with the baby, and that they were fine. That was enough. The child deserved peace unshadowed by old mistakes, and so did I. On a quiet evening that winter, I lit the fireplace and poured a cup of tea. Outside, the street was wrapped in snow, the world muted and clean. I sat by the window, the spider plant now thriving on the sill, and thought of how strange it was that something once so painful had led me here, to quiet, clarity, and gratitude. If someone asked me what revenge felt like, I'd tell them it wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was standing in your own truth so solidly that lies collapse on their own. It was the steady warmth of knowing you didn't have to shout to be heard. As I watched snow gather on the fence, I whispered a small thank you to time, to patience, to endings that made space for beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang faintly, marking another hour gone. I smiled. Life, I realized, doesn't need dramatic closures. Sometimes the best revenge story ends like this. A man sitting by the window, content, with nothing left to hide and everything ahead still unwritten.